Okay, welcome to another Intentional Curiosity podcast. We're calling today's session The Details Matter. And before we kick in, I want to just say thank you for taking the time to listen and to follow my mindset, follow my journey and the things that I've come across, and I hope that it's beneficial. I really encourage people to do more for themselves, to make themselves better, so that the quality of their life can be increased. And this can be done through education, it can be done through fitness and curiosity. It's through being curious that you discover so much, and that is about your body, it's about food, it's about your relationships, and it's about the things that you put effort to within your life, that when you're curious and you learn, these things can flourish more. And I'm really excited to start breaking out and doing these podcasts with other people. I find natural conversation is far easier to watch than to just simply listen to me talk for an hour. And I get excited because then you start to get other people's perspective and you start to see the fact that we go backwards and forward, and like, it's not set in stone. This is not right. This is not wrong. It's a story, but there's always a base or a reason that is associated with somebody believing something. And when you can embark on conversation, it's a lot easier to come up against those false expectations of reality, or to be able to break those things down. Because I think one of the skills that we learn as we dive into discovering things is having the ability within oneself to get a new piece of information and then test everything below it with that new piece of information to see if the 9 things below actually now stand true and resonate according to that new piece. And every single day of our lives, we essentially come across a new piece of information, if not thousands of pieces, which is a proven fact. And the brain shreds what it finds relevant, and it holds on to what it thinks is relevant. So depending on the framework and what you prioritize will determine the things that you pay attention to and what your body naturally holds on to. So within that, it's a perfect segue to get into a podcast about details matter. And within the body, I can talk about the complexions within which the body can go into. You can go into cellular health, you can go into mental health, you can go into your gut bacteria, the way the joints, tendons, ligaments all hold together, the way that you create internal force production, what exercises are good, what ones aren't, is there a good exercise, is there a bad exercise, what are the environments, and so on. There's so many questions that come with details. And I think one of the core components that I want to establish before I even embark on the journey is that something is better than nothing. And what I mean by that is you can have the person who studied the books for 20 years but never starts, and the person who starts is actually going to get further ahead, because that journey is something you learn on the way. And it's the same thing in life, that when you embark on an adventure, it's always going to be unknown. And the one thing that makes you better at that thing is to practice and test. And that's one of the things that I love about life, is that you are constantly practicing and you're constantly testing the parameters that you were originally introduced to see, does this still stand true? And one of the other things around movement and exercise is that when you are learning something new, you just want to start, and it's about starting in a safe place. So when you step into the gym or you start doing a class, you don't instantly go to level 100. It's wise to start at level 1, and you might battle against things like your ego. You might see somebody over there pushing 60 kgs and you're like, I reckon I could do that. But do you have the character within you to say, hey, it's actually really wise to start here and progress? And so something is better than nothing, especially when you don't know all of the details. Any expert within an area can introduce you to those details and expand your mindset. And I am by far not an expert in any of these areas, but I've walked out a process over the last 7 years of continuously studying to understand more about the body, the relationship of lifestyle, more so than specialty and exercise management, and coming in and being like, look, what does it actually take to be a human being that can show up for your friends, your family, your job, while enjoying your life, having a really good time, and telling a story that you're proud of? Because I think especially for men as well, we sit there and it's like we want to be able to be proud of what it is that we do. And within the heart of a woman is like cultivating space and being able to embody who she is in the feminine. And so when you can start to understand these dynamics, and these things do affect the way that I would program training for individuals. It's like if I'm coming in and I'm training around period cycle, if I'm coming in and I'm looking at blood work, or I'm looking at these different parameters that embody so much data, the details actually matter. And when you start to embark on these things and it's the first time it comes across your mind, it might take you 6 months to digest that piece of information, and it might take you a week. It depends on what your previous awareness of this environment is and how that then changes your perspective towards everything else. Because if that 10th piece of information that you've now added throws the other 9 out, you have to start from scratch again. You have to go back to the drawing board. You have to learn. And in all honesty, with science, that's constantly happening. We sit there and we look at the way that we used to coach and that we used to train, and we used to just push and we used to push. But it's like, well, actually now you've got to take stress into consideration. Like, how is sleep contributing? What's your recovery? What sort of protein makeups are you getting? And it's like the base nutrition diet in terms of like your protein, fats, carbohydrates, but now also they're like, oh, actually minerals, vitamins, and all of these things also are a really large contributing factor, because it's not necessarily just calories in versus calories out. But you may sit here and you might listen to this and say, man, that's so much information, it's really overwhelming. It's like, cool. Start with eating clean. Start with going for a walk and trying to get an elevated heart rate and doing better than you did yesterday, because that will see you progressing further than trying to learn all of this information, getting overwhelmed, never starting and saying it's not for me. Your first experience of fitness or health could be negative. It could be that you feel embarrassed. It could be that you feel insecure. It could be that you're worried about what people might perceive of you. And if that's your first experience, then you should revisit that. And that's when you start to deal with the headspace. But when you can try and create an environment that's fun, an environment that's welcoming, and you have that anchor point in your life as to why I should be doing this, simply taking that first step is really vital. So I think the main thing that I really want to start off with today is that actually that first step is genuinely one of the most important things. It genuinely, for me, matters more above the details, because I'm not genuinely going to put you under a 60 kg bar and squat if you've just entered the gym. It's like, I don't know if you can handle that, and probably neither do you. I'm not going to go and send you off on a 5k run because I don't know what your endurance or your breath's like. What are your health conditions? Is this going to cause something that we don't want to go down the embarkment of, or the journey of kind of finding out? And so it's having the ability to sit there and say, what am I comfortable doing, and what can I do that's just a little bit uncomfortable that's going to progress me that little bit more. And the main things that I try and encourage is, obviously, movement is key. The stress and the tension that sits within the body, even sitting here, it's like I sit on a Swiss ball when I work so that I can just kind of keep a little bit of mobility. But even then, sometimes I can find I round more. And what that then does is my posture starts to hold, muscles get tight because they get rigid, and you add stress into an environment that's associated with that as well. And a lot of people lose the ability for rotation. And when you start to look through the layers of muscle, you've got kind of the larger muscles that sit on top, and then the deeper layers, and then what inserts and attaches. If those start to get tight, compromised, weak, lack of range of motion, etc., your body's natural feeling of energy and ability to flow is actually compromised, and those changes are usually made over years, not necessarily an instant unless it's caused by an injury. So as you kind of come through and you work on that journey, it's why I say movement is key. And it was one of the things that I really learned when I did my ankle and had the operation. Because I was immobilized for so long and I couldn't walk properly, it was so frustrating and so uncomfortable, because I would sit there and I'd have all of this tension, and the last thing I wanted to do was go and move. But I realized that if I could override that desire to just kind of fight or flight and stay hidden and not be seen because I was so uncomfortable, and I actually just got out, I breathed fresh air, I put my feet on the grass, I try and ground myself, and I just work on what I can do. Can I do simple movements that are going to encourage that movement to happen? The amount of people that can't isolate or contract or move certain parts of their body because they're like, oh, nah, that's uncomfortable, is quite phenomenal. And I've been there. I genuinely got to the point where it's like, I had so much tension from walking bad for 2.5 years, plus also trying to have to re-strengthen for the surgery after a year and still in that process now, where I genuinely felt like my joints were out of socket, or I felt like something had to be wrong because I had so much tension pulling in the opposite place that I couldn't get the correct ranges of motion. And only by doing movement and testing and simplifying back to the basics and working with other people who I could ask questions to, have I been able to get to the point where I'm starting to feel a little bit more comfortable after 3.5 years of undoing said thing, because the whole body does work as one. And so when you're out walking, when you're out swimming at the beach, when you're on a bike ride and you're doing those things, it has an amazing effect on the human body. And the truth is that life's an exchange. And so, it's, I'm slightly uncomfortable. Is this going to cause me more damage? And it's like, well, is the headspace going to be more compromised by not doing it? And I think that this awareness that sits here, it's like, look, if I go out for a walk and it's slightly uncomfortable, is that actually going to be better for my headspace, which will actually allow me to focus on this task a little better, therefore leading into the point where I can show up a little bit better? And so it's this exchange. It's sitting there and having that self-awareness that as you go into exercise or you go into working on who you are as a person and the things that you like to do to try and build the life that you want, so that you can show up, you can be proud, you can tell a story, you can be friendly towards people, and you can share conversation, and you can share a part of your journey. I think that that's really valuable, and that is what I aim to do with these podcasts. And I really, like I said, I look forward to being able to bring more of these to you with other people so that we can share perspective. And my key is to try and sit there and base all of this off science, because it's well and true to sit here and tell my story but not be able to put the why across to you. And I think that when I sit here and I look at things like stress, and I look at lifestyle, look at circumstances that go on within people's day-to-day lives, if I just sit there and say, well, I did this, you should try it, and it isn't relevant to their environment or their circumstance, I'm actually not helping somebody understand another layer on top of their stack. And so when you introduce that, they're probably going to see the information and say, hey, look, actually that's not relevant, disregard. So my thing as a coach is about education. It's, do I have enough awareness of the environment that I'm talking about to be able to adapt, to be able to make it relevant for you, to be able to sit there and come through and say, hey, according to this situation, at this environment, at this time, these could be contributing factors. I encourage you to go away and test these. Come back to me with the results. Did doing this improve your sleep? Did helping with this increase your mobility and your range? Because unless you take accountability for your own body and your own health, somebody's not going to be able to invest as much time as you into it, and nor will they. The sad and truthful reality is that human beings are extremely busy creatures, and we occupy our time probably over capacity than what we should. And even when you see practitioners within their time slot, they might have 15 minutes, they might have half an hour, you might have the luxury of an hour, and in that space you have their attention. Outside of that space, it's your responsibility. And so I sit there and it's like, I look at myself as a tool that I'm bringing information, or hopefully I'm a tool that might be crafted in a certain way that you can get some leverage to actually do what it is that you need to do for whatever it is that you're looking for. Because everything's genuinely a conversation. It's, there's something that I don't know, am I curious enough to search this out? And this is where the details start to matter. If you aren't compromised and you're without injury, you're probably never going to have to think about this stuff, and you're probably not even listening to this podcast if that's the case. But you might know somebody who is, or know somebody where this could be beneficial, and it's like, oh wow, like that's actually a really interesting perspective. Here's a conversation, start a practice, and see what happens. Because if you stop, it's going to be far worse. And I think that that's the thing, is I spent probably 3 to 4 months where I was in the uttermost pain. It was before the operation, and I sat there and I just got to the point, I was like, I don't want to move, I am in so much discomfort. I'm getting 2 to 3 hours sleep a night. My pain levels are sitting at like an 8 or 9 out of 10. I've got nerves firing, and I kind of went sedentary. And in that, my headspace plummeted. My nutrition was terrible. My sleep pattern was shocking. My pain level was really uncomfortable. And just my overall lifestyle I was existing, but I wasn't living. And the undoing of that takes a lot of work, let alone being in that space and working with it. So community, friends, environment, people that you can speak honest and true to are so valuable, because they might be the one thing that pulls you through that. It might be that you have some accountability, and I use work as the way for me to get through all of that, because there wasn't anything else I wanted to show up for, but I knew for myself that if I had accountability, I don't like to disappoint. And so I used that as something I knew because of my character that I could anchor into so that I would show up. And so when you learn about yourself and you learn those details, you can then attach those to your reality to then go into the depths that sit within who you are to approach a situation. And sometimes it might be a 3-month solution. Sometimes it might be a 3-year solution. And that journey empowers you to tell a story. But having the wisdom to understand, is this story specific to me? Can I recreate this to then put out? And what does that look like? We look for comfort, and we look for familiarity, and we look for that support. But is it actually beneficial being in that place that feels comfortable? And it kind of leads me into where I wanted to go to, where pain is a learning invitation. And as harsh as it is, I'm not talking about like physical pain in terms of like, oh, I want to see what this does, ouch. It's like, that's not wise. But when you go through a situation and something happens and you react to it, you have a choice to either rise up and overcome, or you have a choice to stay victim to the thing and let it mess with you and deter you away from the lifestyle that you should be living. Because the core foundation of life is that it is a beautiful thing, and we should be chasing out the potential that sits within us to make the world a better place via being ourselves, because we carry a unique nature as individuals that only you can bring to the table, only I can bring to the table, and here we are. And so when you put your body in the right environment, it can heal. And the complexities that can go to is extremely vast and long, and the simplicities that it can go to can be extremely direct. And knowing those questions is the journey. That self-awareness. You might be born with diabetes. You might be passing through and you've got a defect of bone growth, and it's like, okay, so complications already start at slightly larger than what a large population is going to go through. Or you might sit there and say, hey, look, I've actually just had 10 years where I built a business, I was so busy, I neglected everything else, I've come out the other end and now realize I need to deal with my stuff. And it's like, okay, cool. And so those parameters are going to be approached differently. And as a practitioner, like as I try and coach people and I walk through this with people, one way doesn't work for all. And so as you approach your own life and you take those details, the details matter, because only you know you to the extent that you do. And if you don't have the ability to sit there and reflect internally about what led to the situation and the environment, your guess is as good as mine. And so when we embark on conversation, one of the things that I like to do is I try and educate. And we talk about sleep, we talk about food, we talk about nutrition, environment, stress, family, like what are your finances like, how are your relationships, what do these things contribute, and how does that then embody the energy that you show up with? Because if your family environment isn't fun, you don't like your job, and then you're in a place that you don't enjoy, we're probably going to be battling for a very, very long time. And I won't be able to promise results, because it does come down to that internal reflection that is led on by you taking accountability and ownership for your life. So as much as it's a really hard thing to say, it's like, well, the ball is in your court, and the more that we can jump into that, and I can encourage people to step up to the big thing that's standing and looking at them in the face that they're scared of, is the further that will progress, and eventually you grow, and that thing doesn't necessarily get easier, you just get stronger. And it's the same thing within the gym. It's why I love that environment. It's like, well, you know, I might start off with muscles this size, but as I train, they start to grow, and it's like, congrats, like the weight didn't get easier, you got stronger. And that works with mental headspace, it works with training, it works with awareness around nutrition, conversation and all of these things. And this is what I want to go into. It's the details do matter, and they matter at the point when something is compromised. And depending on how long you've gone on that foundation before it's compromised will determine the flow-on effect of how much time you then have to do to understand that thing. And if you're curious enough and you embark on that journey, you can become really, really good at what you do. And part of what I love about the science of training is that the base structure of the human body is the same for everybody. We all have bones, we all have tendons, we've got ligaments, we've got muscles, we've got neural pathways, you've got lymphatic systems, you've got all your organs, you've got your gut health, you've got your skin, you've got your like everything that embodies who you are as a person is reasonably similar across the board, but the differences that come into play are your environment, your chemistry, the food you put in, the nutrition, your headspace, and those things. So as we start to come into this and the details start to matter, are you curious enough to deep dive and try and understand what don't I know? And this is a key thing for me that I have really been challenging myself with, especially as I've gone on this journey. It's like there has to be something that I don't know, because the details are here, the facts are set, and science says this, but yet I'm not at the point where that's what I've got. And it's like, okay, well, how do I get to this? Because I have a memory within my body where this is what it felt like to be healthy, this is what it felt like to be strong, this is what it felt like to have good energy. And it's like, well, I now have head fog, I get constant headaches, I struggle with muscle activation, my sleep's highly compromised, I can feel my gut health, my skin had changed because my hormones have become imbalanced, and I was unavailable to show up in the way that I wanted to. And it's like, well, it's not wise for me to let my reality stay that way, so what do I need to do to change? And that's what's led to this space being built, is I didn't have the time or the tools that I wanted to be able to work through my rehab process, because conventional gyms were always busy and I couldn't get the gear that I wanted to work through. It takes me maybe 2 to 3 hours over a whole day to walk through the step process that I've got, which is extremely unreasonable for a lot of people. But my approach to rehab, which is I spent 3.5 years, or kind of 2.5 years leading into the surgery and that 6 months post, having to relearn to walk. And how do I reset a gait pattern? If I take roughly 10,000 steps a day subconsciously moving through and that's compromised, I actually need to override it back to what is now going to be its new path of least resistance. So I need to exceed that intentionally with my training so that I can then better and try and reestablish that movement pattern back into what is feeling right. And the right environment creates healing. And this is something I think we don't talk about enough within training, is very rarely am I so sore the next day that I can't move from my training, because I'm not pushing myself to my 100% max every single day, because I've realized the stress that that puts on the body and the energy and that pain response, and almost like that, like I'm not personally training to be the world's strongest man. I'm not the world's biggest long distance runner. I don't need to push that hard. So what is the environment that you're training for, and find the capacity or those areas that you can succeed, because finding that movement pattern over 6 months, one can be so much less stress on the body than pushing really hard for 8 weeks or 10 weeks because you let yourself get to a spot you didn't want to. It's like, well, actually, we're accountable to that. Was it the circumstance? Was it the environment? And if you're curious enough, you can ask those questions to figure out what led to the environment for you to get to that point, because that's the effect and not the cause. So what are the things that caused it for that to be the outcome? And so I jumped in, I created this space, and I wanted to test reflexology. I wanted to test stability. I wanted to test the way that my body could move together, and how do I create that chain so that as I'm rotating and that movement happens, where are the bits that are compromised, where a muscle structure isn't able to offer balance. And when you try and isolate down to that level of information, it is so difficult to track, and it takes so much self-awareness, and it's almost unreasonable, because you can't really fully ever isolate to one thing unless you're using like an electrode inserted into a muscle that's stimulating it. You probably could, but anyway, that's the story for another time. And so as you start to go through that journey and that process, it's like, well, you actually just need to put yourself in an environment that's healthy. And that works mentally, it works within your nutrition. Like if you take away the temptations and they're not there, you're not going to be tempted. You may still desire it, but there isn't the outcome to actually go after the thing that's in front of you. And so with exercise and that journey to health, that's why I sit there and I try and push sleep, food, laughter, outdoors, reducing screen time, because for me, one of the questions that I really like to try and consider is, if I look back in history, what do I want to bring with me? And if I look forward to the future, what do I want to aim for? And I talked a little bit about this in the last podcast, but it's like tech and health tracking provides a significant amount of data that can contribute towards seeing your success in the way that you approach your training, approach your lifestyle. We start to learn about sleep, we start to learn about hormone tracking, you start to understand your period cycle, you start to understand the temperatures and what's happening within the hormones, you start to understand more around how your energy is affected. You might have seen, if you've been following what I do on social media, that I'd done a cold ice bath and the stats showed up to be absolutely terrible for my sleep. And then you go into the science and the research that's behind all of that and you're like, wow, that's actually why. And so I said, okay, if I actually go about it this way, I can create a routine and a lifestyle that in 6 months' time should see some success towards a difference than where I'm at now. And do you have the resilience within yourself to do more than a week? Do you have the ability to set your mindset to a month or a year? And how do you make it enjoyable? Because if you're curious enough, you can find something within your reality that'll captivate your attention. And you might sit there and say, hey, I hate the gym. And I'm like, cool, where can I find a way that you can track your exercise? And you might sit there and say, hey, look, I love playing golf. And it's like, cool, that's getting your rotation. Can you do both sides? I don't know, I haven't coached a golfer. But can you find an environment where you are getting outdoors and you're getting those factors, you're getting your movement, you're getting your mobility, it's contributing towards your overall health, and over time you're seeing that. You may sit there and say, hey, I actually want to try and do this in 6 months. It's like, okay, cool, so focus needs to go in a little bit more deeper. What are you willing to neglect? Because if everything's an exchange, we all have 24 hours in a day. Depending on the priorities that we have in our day will determine the effect and the outcome of what it is that we're aiming for. So as we come through and we remain curious and we ask these questions and we go down to that level where the details matter, it's like, I have an imbalance and I want to try and match what I can push to what I can pull. And it's like, cool, that's a really amazing goal, because that which you push, you should be able to pull. And it's like, if I'm doing a sled push with 200 and I can't pull back 200, I want to try and increase that balance so that I'm less likely to injure myself because I've overbuilt. But the core foundation of like strength for me is that muscle holds health. And I love it. There's a lady, Katie Dabrowski, who runs and helped to contribute, I think it was Old Bull Athletics, and she said this amazing thing, and she's like, muscle is the equivalent of gold, and if you have muscle at the age past 40, the health standard that you're going to be at is such an advantage to everyone else. And I absolutely love it, and it's always stuck with me. It's like, one thing that we should aim for is to have muscle on the body, because it is going to absorb impact. It is going to be able to react and create force. It's going to allow you to be healthier and burn more calories, because the more that you do things with muscle, the higher the output, and you're going to see results that allow you to show up really well. And if you only ever train legs and then you neglect the upper body, you're taking a piece while neglecting the other, and that's not wise. So overall health is really important, which is why I try and incorporate things like Pilates in with my clients, as well as strength training, rotation work, reflexology, endurance, breath work, because all has to be encompassed. You can't just pick one piece and then neglect the rest, because it's like, if you consistently only ever weight train 7 days a week going forward, the stress, the impact, the joints, all of those sorts of things can potentially allow reduced range of motion, because there's so much tightness and there's so much tension. And it's like, can you actually breathe and open your rib cage? Can you hold the ability to reach up above your head and go for something, versus, oh no, I'm too tight, I can't get the range of motion? It's like, well, you've compromised something is this actually intentional, or is this a byproduct because you didn't know something? And then you might sit there and you look at those 10 things and you say, hey, look, actually number 5 of my 10 was actually flawed. I'm going to pull that out, relearn, learn some details around these things, and then re-embark on the journey. And it's like, oh, cool. And so it's not necessarily that it was wrong, because like I said, you sit there and the details matter, but something is better than nothing. And it's like, you're probably going to be in a better off position by going and doing exercise, building muscle, but at some point you'll go to do something and you might say, oh, I actually can't do that. Why? And if you're curious enough, you can embark on the journey. Welcome to the internet. You can research pretty much anything nowadays and you'll get an answer. How do you then take that information and figure out what of it is true? And this is the hard thing about the generation that we're in now, is there's so much information and there's so much opinion, which is why I have to go and base it all off science. Because if I try and take my personal feelings towards something, like I said earlier, I had so much tension in the body that I felt like joints weren't sitting properly. And it was like, okay, well, actually, like, I can go get a scan done and actually find out. And it's like, cool, okay, well, the joint's actually fine and it's not compromised. So I can tick that off the list. Now I can go to the next layer. It's like, cool, connective tissue, muscle, all of these things restricted. Because if it's so tight that you actually just can't get that space to create, then when I go to do something like rotate, I'm going to struggle. And so as you start to come in, when do the details matter? When something gets to the point where it's compromised. And as harsh as that is, you can be preventative and you can be working towards, which is why I love this intentional curiosity. Is it's like, oh, that's something I haven't tried. And you might go and be a strength and conditioning person who's in the gym doing weights 7 days a week, and then the missus is like, hey, come and do a Pilates class with me. And you sit there and you're like, yeah, okay, go on. Like, I'm curious. I haven't tried this before. You go in, the moment you're on that like reformer class bed, or you're in that stand and you're in that pose and the whole body starts to shake, it's a massive wake-up call opportunity that if you're curious enough to see that there's a weakness, then there's an invitation to make that weakness less over time before it catches you out. And so do you have those parameters? Are you surrounded by people in your day-to-day life who you can see different styles of training and potentially be curious to embark on that? What are your goals? What are you aiming for? Because if I'm aiming for strongman, I'm definitely not going to go and then try and run 20 or 30 kilometers an hour 20 or 30 kilometers a day. Try and work towards that, because it's contradicting the purpose of what I'm trying to achieve. So, but then it comes down to seasons, and training in seasons is something that I think is extremely vital, because there are times where I feel extremely strong. I just want to push weights. It feels really good and I feel like I could just keep going. But through experience and through time and process, I know that I usually cycle over about 3 to 4 months in terms of like, if I'm pushing really, really hard to try and grow muscle, I want to make sure that I'm doing the rehab and the recovery to complement that, not leading to those imbalances. And that's just my personal journey. Some people might be able to push out year blocks. Some people might be able to do 6 months. Some people might have a really beautiful balance between Pilates, weightlifting, cardio, swimming, all of these things, and they have that as a part of their routine, and therefore they don't have to change it. And so this is what I mean by the circumstances and the environment have to differ per individual. So are you willing enough to learn yourself, because you are the detail that matters? What is your family history? What are the things that show up as a warning sign? We look at, as simple and as disgusting as it probably sounds for a lot of people, like, what does your poo look like? It's like, it's a really, really good indicator of what's my gut health like. And I know within Chinese medicine, they look at the tongue and they'll sit there and say, show me your tongue, show me what it looks like. And within that, it tells a story about the body. And there's so many different ways or journeys. And I find these things really interesting, because there's something I don't know and I want to learn it, so that when it comes to conversation, I can potentially refer. Because one of my biggest strengths is networking. I love to meet people. I like to learn what makes them passionate, and I like to try and learn from them their experience. And with that, it makes me a better coach, and it allows me to try and learn to listen and find that passion and then test it against the science. And it's like, okay, now I have more pieces to my arsenal that I can then take out at the right time, because every now and again you just want a little craft knife just to cut the edge of the tape on the box, but sometimes you need a flipping machete and you need to cut that stuff down. And so what are you willing to do? Do you have the awareness that this time is due for this and this is that? Because fitness isn't just going to the gym. Fitness is coming through and being able to sit there and show up for your family. It's being able to show up in your day-to-day. It's about not being concerned that if I reach for something, I'm going to break. And the more we can embark on that, you can go layers and layers deeper. But like I said, showing up and doing something is extremely vital. Going to the gym, learning what does it feel like, what's a max range, how do I create internal tension. And I think the basics are really important. And so we're going to dive into those a little bit now, which is, as we come in, what's the starting point, what are the base foundations. And I did a course, and it's based around teaching people the basics of a squat, a hinge, a lunge, a push, and a pull. And I genuinely find that until somebody can hold or learn how to hinge, I don't really want to go and then complement their underload, because whatever the patterns are, if they're not loading the correct muscles as they go through, it's just going to complement the path of least resistance. And so you may be doing an exercise, but are you loading correctly? Are you putting more stress on the body? Are you actually loading your lower back rather than rounding through the glutes, lengthening through the hamstrings? You might find that you're so tight that you actually can't get that capability to hold a bar on the back. Like, there's so many contributing factors. And so it's like, okay, well, instead of being so keen to jump to that 100%, can you put in your mind to be curious about the process? Because you learn so much in the process. And as you go in, and I look at something like a squat, like as you squat down, are you compromised? Do you round to try and get that range? Do you find that you're sitting back? Do you have the ability to hold your breath, your torso, hold a natural arch, and then walk through? If you put your hands behind your head and you try and initiate a squat, like, can you actually go through the range of motion? And then helping somebody to understand their body. Like, I love it. Brett Contreras talks about how you have different lengths of, obviously, femur, bone structure, the insert into the hips. Like, you know, male hips are slightly different to female hips. And so the balance points around all of those things, it's like the same exercises work, but to execute them with the same efficiency might require little adjustments. And so as you start to go through these differences and you understand those dynamics about yourself, you would then have the wisdom to say, hey, look, I'm going to try and do a lunge, but because I understand a little bit about my body, I need a slightly wider stance, or I'm slightly weak in this area, so I can target it by doing this, or I can make this more beneficial because of this. And for me, that's fuel on the fire, because now I'm being intentional about my training, and I'm not just putting stress or load onto the body that's making me so sore that I don't want to move for a week, and I'm like, oh my God. It's like, actually, I understand how this works. I've learn how to open the body up as I come into a clean, or I go into a jerk and press, or you go through these different movements as you go and you learn, because when the foundation is set, you want to test the parameters. It's like, what does it look like if I go into HIIT training? What does it look like if I go into Pilates? If I go into CrossFit? If I go into strength training? And as you walk through this journey, there's no way I would ever sit there and say, food is food. I'm just going to cook one meal for the rest of my life. It's like, wow, that's going to be boring. Like, I guess maybe you could make up a really nutrient-dense meal that would suffice, but guarantee when you go out with friends, you're not going to get that. It's like you cook something at a different place, it won't have your ideal ingredients. Can you adapt? And so I think training should be that. It's like, I want to be strong, but I want to be flexible. I want to be able to react. I want to be stable. I want to be able to do silly things, because that's what we do as human beings. It's like, you might be mountain biking and you accidentally clip a tree, and it's like, well, all of a sudden your training and your strength training went out the door. Do I have the rotational capacity under force in an unknown direction to be able to tense the body, hold true, and brace for impact? Because we don't practice falling, and it's something that gets lost as you start to get older. And you'll see that as I do my training, it's like, I roll around on the floor. I used to do martial arts, and I absolutely love how it teaches you to rotate and twist and handle leverage and trying to worm your way out of these different places, because it's so vital that your vertebrae or the structure actually can do those movements. Because if you don't naturally do it or intentionally do it, you'll lose it. And I think it's the same thing that when you look at a garden, if you plant a tree and you don't water it, it's going to die. If you don't work on your mobility, there's a good chance you're going to lose it. If you don't work on your strength, there's a good chance you're going to lose it. If you don't work on your relationships, there's a good chance that they're not going to be there. If you don't work on your nutrition, the outworking of that will start to show. If you don't work on your finances, and so on and so on. And so the outworking of all of those things, as you start to build through and you start to understand, don't take it personally if something goes wrong. See it as an opportunity for you to learn so that you can then go and discover. Take people on the journey, like sit there and say to your friends, man, I realized how much I've lost ability to simply squat, and these are the things that I'm going to try. Guarantee people are going to pop up with advice and they're going to do all of this, but be curious enough to try and listen to see if it was something that you were aware of versus you weren't. It might be your foot positioning needs to change so that you can start. It might be that your feet or your gait pattern's compromised and you actually can't get the right muscles to trigger, or you've lost mobility, and all of these different things to test. So it's when something is compromised that the details start to matter. If you can go out and you can go for a 5K run, congratulations, that's amazing. And I sit there and it's like, it is genuinely a feat that so many people probably can't do. And I encourage and I applaud and I applaud the success, but I also sit there and say, you're curious enough to go and try this? Because I can try and complement. If you've got stronger muscles, you can create a higher force production and it's going to complement your running. And these are the conversations that I like to have around the details. It's like, what sort of life do you want to live? And it's a really, really deep question, because you kind of sit there and so many people never reflect to that level. It's like, are you truly happy? Do you wake up in the morning ready to go, or is it the most depressing thing, having to roll out of bed? And do I have good people around me? Like, what are the things that make you that you're grateful for? Because if the environment you're in isn't returning the results that you want, then potentially change the environment. It might be education. It could be an after course study once you finish work. And there's so many different things that we have access to now, which is what I love. And it's why I put people's names out here, that these people have been beneficial towards my journey. That is, I've gone through this rehab process and I'm still working through that. As it's like Katie Dabrowski, I look at Brett Contreras, I look at Alex Whitehead, I look through the guys who at MoveU, who literally go to the most in-depth detail around learning to move those individual vertebrae. How do I pike the hips? How do I get stability? How do I learn? And all of these things have been such motivational factors towards me maintaining my headspace towards being able to tackle the deal, because I have an anchor point as to what's right, and that's what I aim for. And then I come across these guys who are doing this training method called the WEC method, and I'm like, I freaking love it. It's about rotation, it's about force power, it's about like when you move, how do you cross? Because when you think about it on an actual scientific level, you're very rarely perfectly symmetrically loaded. And to achieve that requires a very, very complicated amount of awareness. And to sit perfectly center, to have your hips perfectly center, your feet in alignment, looking exactly the same, your shoulders stacked, your core, chest up, breath work. And it's like, I sit there and it's like, oh, there we go, slightly balanced. But it's like naturally you kind of sit off balance. You sit, you rotate, you walk, you lean on one hip, you do all of these things. And it was like, I remember talking to a lady in the gym and she's like, man, I can't figure this out. Like, I feel so imbalanced. And I'm like, well, you've just had a kid. You're probably holding onto the baby one side and it is causing you that imbalance. You're favoring one hip. You're sitting on the body slightly different. And it was like, oh my word. And it's like, cool, curiosity. It's like I sit there and I'm like, oh, what could be a piece of this puzzle that led to this? And it is. You've naturally got your strong side. You hold the kid, you do this, and you do everything else with this movement. And it's like your body's going to strengthen to the position you put the most time in. And so if you're curious enough to start the journey 5 years in advance before you get to this point, then that factor won't actually throw your environment, because you're strong and you're prepared for it. And so this is what I mean by curiosity. The details matter, but at the same time, it's going to become intentional to learn when something is compromised. So do you have the curiosity? Will you be able to ask those questions? Can you embark on that journey to sit there? And there's going to be times when you come across practitioners who don't actually know the answer that you're looking for, but they're doing the best with what they've got. Because I'm the same. It's you come to me, if I don't know, I'm going to be really upfront and say, hey, look, this isn't actually my area of expertise. I would recommend this person because your success is what matters more to me than business. I want relationships, I want network, I want understanding and knowledge. And I would so much prefer if you came back to me 6 months and said, hey, that person taught me this and it was ace. Thank you so much. I then learned something that I didn't know and I get better and we both grow together, which is phenomenal. And so as you come through and you look at training, you look at your own education, you look at understanding a little bit more than you knew yesterday, you're progressing in a really intentional direction because you're working on yourself. And it's so vital to do that. And if you get into a comfortable patch in your life, and amazing, like I love these, don't get me wrong, don't take them for advantage. Use it to leverage growth for your future, because so often we get to those comfortable patches and we sit there and it's like, oh, I just want to take a break. Like I'm going to spend a day here, and then 6 months pass and you're like, oh, okay, like, you know, I'm just feeling lazy, this environment, because you will always become like the environment you put yourself in. And so if you can hook into education, if you can hook into knowledge and understanding, putting yourself in uncomfortable situations intentionally, you're going to grow. It's why I love getting people to go out and travel, because you're going to figure out a part of the world that probably clashes with your culture. You're going to learn something that you didn't know. You're going to try different food. You're going to feel like what it's like to be on a plane for 36 hours and that frustrating compression of sitting there with no sleep and terrible aircon, and working through those things. But the experience, the memories, and what you learn in the process, it's like you did something difficult, you got a story to tell, and it's a beautiful thing. So as we start to go into education, it's like I really highly encourage you to learn how to load muscle. And larger muscles and training those is really beneficial. It's like you've got your classic, your squat, your deadlifts, you've got your bench press, your back muscles. Like as you work through these exercises and you go through them, you might find that one actually makes you feel really uncomfortable. Be curious enough to sit there and be like, okay, what's the next depth? Or maybe you go and get a coach for 2 months and you work through the process to learn the structure. And something always comes at a cost. If you don't put money towards it and you neglect it, it's probably going to cost you more down the line. And so while you're in that position to learn and you are healthy, it's great to go through that process of sitting there and being like, hey, look, I'm going to invest in my future, because it's a really good time to do that now. And as you load muscle, you learn to feel like what it's good load versus a bad load. And you can be little differences of, I can grab with these 3 fingers here, which trigger this nerve, versus these 2, which help with the response to a different muscle system. And those are details that not everybody needs to know, because they're probably not going to be compromised for a lot of people. Ask somebody with golfer's elbow around what it feels like to load a tendon rather than the muscle. They'll be able to tell you. And it's like those dynamics of like, oh, this causes a pain point. How do you undo that pain point to strengthen what needs to be strengthened so that the body can go back into that mechanical movement position that it should be in to get that environment? And so beyond or below kind of the muscle, you start to look into like your joints, you start to look into your tendons, your ligaments, and obviously your bone as well. And the way that all of this moves together is such a beautifully phenomenal thing. And I put way too much time and thought into this, because I'm like, how does that happen? Like instantaneously, the amount of muscles and nerve responses and neurons firing just to simply raise an arm. You think about it, I'm extending through here, I'm lengthening through there, probably doing a little bit of compression in the core as I reach. And it's like the dynamic of like the neck muscles and everything that goes into just a simple movement like raising the hand. You can put as much time into learning this as you want, or you can sit there and you can keep your base foundation strong. And that's why I encourage diversity. Do your HIIT training, do your rotation work, do your strength training, work on endurance, work on things like swimming, because you're working that full body engagement. And so often in the gym nowadays, we target specific muscles, but it's not very often that we start to go through full extension or full engagement through exercise. And as you come through and you learn these things and you become healthier, set an example for future generations, because if where you're at now can then leverage for them to be more curious, because hey, dad's really fit, we go out hiking, we go climbing, we do all of these outdoor activities, then they're probably not going to have to work as hard at it as you did because it's going to be naturally ingrained in them, but they can then use it as a stepping stool for them to become stronger, healthier, and more well-being. The things that they might get to experience in life are going to be far more because you did the hard work, and it is that leverage point. And as we come through and we go into simple things, it's like work on your nutrition, try and eat clean, because if you do that long term, hopefully there aren't any other complications in terms of like diabetes and those sorts of things, but you will be far better off in 10 years time if you eat closer to a whole food diet than you do preserved food. Simple things like putting a filter on your water. It's like there's so many chemicals that are posted in water just to keep it healthy to theoretically consume, that you're better off to filter that and make sure that you're actually getting H2O. You sit there and you work on your sleep. It's like, I want to make sure that by 9 o'clock my phone goes down because I'm in bed at 10, and I want an hour of no screen time before I go into bed. And these little individual things are really healthy foundations that I've got as non-negotiables in my life. Unless it's like a Friday night and I'm out till midnight and I'm out with friends and I'm having a good time, of course I'm going to compromise that because that's good for the soul. It makes me happy as a human being, and I think that those dynamics that are associated with those things actually allow us to grow, and it adds joy to life. And that was what I went to before. It's just like, are you fundamentally happy with your life and what story that's portraying? Because it's not about the week, it's about the whole. Like, if you look at a year's progress, are you happy with what you achieved over a year? Because you're going to have good weeks, you're going to have bad weeks, but change your moving average. And I work with clients on monthly bases instead of weekly, because I'm like, I want you guys to try and aim to get in 4 workouts a week. Within that, I still want you to work on your breath work. I want you to work on this, and I want you to send me photos of meals you've made, because I want to see that you're progressing towards these things. So the encouragement around the details is you're better off starting and doing something and then learning as you go. Obviously, don't sit there and say, hey, I've done nothing for 5 years, I'm going to go and do a marathon. Extremely unwise. The amount of tension you might get through it, what the overall outcome of that might be post, could be detrimental. Depending on your training style and your nutrition, what intensity do I want to go with that? And what do I need to do to match that intensity in terms of recovery? So that way, as I come into the said environment, I'm not talking nutrition, I'm talking sleep, I'm talking mobility, stretching, movement. What level do I need to match those things to the training that I'm wanting to do to achieve the outcome? And be realistic. Like, I think the interesting part of social media, and this is another whole conversation that I might dive into, is that people put up the best versions of themselves. And I catch myself doing it all of the time with movement. I want it to look good. I want to try and make sure of this. And it's like, but I don't really show as much of the days when I'm like, my ankle's screaming at me, it's so sore, and I've had a nerve that's triggered and I haven't slept for 3 days properly because I can't lie in bed comfortable. And it's like, people probably don't really want to see that, but at the same time, it's important to talk about that discomfort, because I don't want you guys to think that I get it easy just because I work in fitness. It's like, I still have to make the same decisions that you do. I just prioritize my time slightly different. It's like, I want to sit there and I want to come over those things. But when you look at social media and you look at these influencers, I highly encourage you, and me included. It's like, if you look back over my journey, you will see I've been doing this for north of 5 years. You'll see that although I am not the most qualified person down to that high performance detail, that's why I don't take high performance clients. It's like, I'm really good at coaching people for lifestyle, and I'm really good at keeping people fit and healthy as an overall plane, not sport specific for 100%. I would like to go down that line for sure, because there's so many details that you can get really curious on. Like, let's look at your blood work, let's look at your genetics, let's look at those things, but I don't have access to those things yet. And so I will do what I'm good at, and I will refer at said time. But when you are seeking out people and you are listening to them, ask the questions of what's their track record? What environment is this reasonable for? And it's like, you know, you might sit there and be really inspired by the CrossFit Games and say, hey, look, I want to go for that because I love the way they look. I love the intensity. I love the energy. It's like, cool. What are the 5 steps before you get to the CrossFit Games or you get to a performance of a match that you should probably go through to prepare the body to handle that? Because your body will do it for you, but will it love you for it? And those are the things that I sit there and it's like, I don't mind taking 2 or 3 days off strength training if the body's feeling a bit compromised, and then going back to stillness work, breath work, recentering, because I have the awareness and the details matter that if I push through this, it's not going to be comfortable and it's not going to be embodying of the person that I want to present myself to the world to be. I want to sit there and say, hey, actually I did take a week off, and it is also really normal because I was spending time with loved ones, I was with friends, I actually just had a really insane work week and I didn't get the time to train. And that is going to be a reality that you face in your day-to-day, because at some point something's always going to give, and sitting there and being prepared for when it does is vital. So the details matter. Remain curious. If you're in an environment that you're thriving in, put time into an environment that you're not, and be intentional towards it, because it's an exchange. It's a give and it's a take. And so work through this. I hope this inspires you. Like I really, really do. It's like we all have the potential to be fit, and we have the potential to be strong. We have the ability to overcome obstacles and circumstances in our life, be it through health, be it through emotion, be it through the environments that you're in, because we live in a world where we can pretty much make anything that we want. It just determines how long is it going to take us to get there. What do I need to learn? There's so many factors. So thank you for listening. And yeah, this has been another podcast on Details Matter. And I look forward to hearing your feedback. If there's any topics that you guys specifically want me to dive into, then drop them into the comments, because I love knowing what people are curious about. And it's so much easier for me to steer a direction if I'm being asked questions, because then I've got something to address rather than sitting here and trying to pick a topic and going through. Styles of training is potentially what I'm looking at doing as well. What's HIIT? What's rotation? How do we create these? What's the mind-muscle connection around how to engage and create that force production? How do you read imbalances in the body? What does that look like? And so as we start to build out these podcasts over time, I hope that you find them beneficial and that you enjoy them. So thank you for tuning in.